We'll look at disentangling a preset in a moment so we can see how it has been put together, and therefore so that we can build similar preset patches but individualized to our needs. I'll start first of all though by walking through the process of adding modulation sources to drive the modulation target. Now here's a fairly simple preset that contains no modulation sources at present. I'll feed some audio through it first of all, so we have something to compare it to when we add some modulation sources later. So here we go. Okay, now remember to add a modulation source means selecting here, and then choosing a modulation source type. I'll choose the XLFO option, so now we see the XLFO has been initiated and appears down in the modulation sources area. Presently we don't see a modulation slot with any value, and that's because we haven't as yet linked the source to the target. So we'll do that now. By clicking on this button here, the source drag button, I can now select and point at any particular target of my choice. You'll no doubt notice that as soon as I select the source drag button, the user interface dims slightly and the available modulation targets are illuminated. Now, I only need to connect the source to the target, and you'll see the connecting string between them. I'll connect the XLFO source to the filter 1 cutoff dial as our target, making sure that I don't select the pan dial. And that's it really. That's one way of connecting the source to the target. And consequently, we see in the slots area, this has now been updated to include it. From this point, you can add further modulation sources and linked to their targets, or just with this filter and modulate one. If you do want to add more, you'd go through the same process again, or you can manually add another slot by clicking on the smaller plus button here, just above the newly created slot. For the moment, I'll stick to just this one whilst I talk through the principles of what we do. You'll see a level slider here on the slot. Left-clicking and dragging determines the amount by which the modulation will operate. If you want to be more precise setting this value, hold your Shift key whilst doing it. OK. Now, if we did have two slots here, and in actual fact I'll do that, I'll add another one by clicking this small plus button. Notice there is no target yet. And then setting up another type. All I need to do is click on here to choose a different target. I'll choose pan. Well now, if I hold the Alt key down, I can adjust both slots simultaneously. Actually, I'm going to do it with the one below, the bottom slot there, because the pop-up was obscuring our view. It doesn't get in the way now. Okay, now also, if you remember from our last tutorial, by clicking here, we can adapt this slot to change to another modulation target from those that are available. I'll leave them, and in fact I'm going to remove our second one. So to remove a slot, click on the cross remove button, and I'll remove that second pan modulation target that we've just added in. As you work with Volcano 2 and with modulation, you'll notice that a small m appears next to certain parameters. Well, this means a particular parameter is being modulated by a specific source. It's just a very user-friendly visual indication. And to be able to see what slots actually modulate the particular target, just click on the M, this modulator indicator. OK, and to revert back, click away or on the M again to go back to our normal view. By the way, when one of these modulation indicators does appear next to a particular parameter, either a filter button or an envelope generator, well, all this means is one or more parameters are getting modulated. And simply by clicking on the M indicator, you will highlight any particular slots that do modulate a target, either of the component or envelope generator. When you use an XLFO, as we have done here, well, this can be used as a 16-step sequencer, with distinct glide for every step within the sequence. Now I just want to quickly flick back to where we were a few moments ago, before we set the modulation source to the target. And you'll notice I've not got the slot populated now. I want to briefly go through some of the available parameter adjustment options within here. So with this XLFO in place, you can see a waveform display to the right here that this XLFO uses to filter and modulate the signal. At present, the frequency is set to free running mode so that you can manually adjust the frequency dial between 0 and 500 Hz. Now you can change from free to any of these synchronized cycle lengths. Now the frequency dial determines the amount of time that will elapse between one waveform cycle and the next. And if you do change to a sync cycle length between 16 and 1/64th, although we're just off screen there, well, the frequency dial will change to an offset dial, so you can offset if you prefer. Now speaking of offsets, within the step editor here, you'll just about see at this resolution, this triangle shape. The beginning vertical line indicates the cycle's start point, which means if you want to, you can left click and drag to offset the phase or beginning of the XLFO cycle. If you want to take it back accurately, double click and then you can reset it to 0. You'll also notice here those two numbers. If you click them, you'll reveal, in this case, step 1 with extra parameter adjustability, or step 2 provides the same settings. The only difference here between step 1 and step 2 is the value setting, as it cycles up and down. To add a further step, click this plus button, and now we have step 3. And you can, if you want to, adjust on the graph here if you prefer to set parameters visually. Okay, now let's relink the source to the target. I can go for any of these illuminated options, but I'll choose the frequency dial once more. Okay, and we'll have a listen, and I'll play around with some of these parameters to see what I can do to the sound. Here we go. I've now added an envelope generator here, so let's set this up to target the main delay. I'll click here to create a new target slot and point at the delay dial. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'll do it the other way by selecting here and choosing filter 2 delay. Then if I want to add another filter, the filter 1 delay, I could always link from here like this. Right then, let's have a final listen and I'll adjust to tailor the sound. Of course, what I do to process the signal will more than likely be different to what you think works for you, but at least now you've seen the potential behind Volcano 2.